Can you please close the door? Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good afternoon, everyone. We're beginning our session. So within this International Financial Congress, we are going to discuss the IFRS 9 system, which regulates the accounting reporting. And I would like to introduce our speakers: Maria Voloshyna, Director of the Department of Accounting Regulation of the Bank of Russia; then Alexey Lobanov, Director of the Department of Banking Regulation of the Bank of Russia; then Mikhail Ratinsky, Senior Director and Head of the Accounting Unit of Sberbank and partner of PricewaterhouseCoopers Audit Department. So the topic of transfer to this IFRS 9 system has a revolutionary nature. And the Bank of Russia historically tried in different periods to implement regulation of accounting reporting system and modernize these accounting requirements, including that IAS 39 requirements. They were incorporated into securities market regulation, and part of those aspects were reflected in the documents of derivatives regulation. And of course, the transfer to this IFRS 9 standards and their inclusion into the Russian regulation, as I said, is of revolutionary nature. Secondly, transfer to an introduction of IFRS 9 standards at the beginning of 2019 became an important step of implementation of state regulation of the sphere in line with the accounting reporting law, and together with other international standards, they form the basis of sectoral standards. And it was extremely important to be in line with the federal law requirements and to use international standards in development of our documents. I believe that implementation of IFRS 9 standards improved transparency of accounting and also improved the level of professional decisions. Historically, Bank of Russia began working with normative documents regulating the accounting sphere in line with IFRS 9 systems after the order of Minfin in 2016, where the Ministry of Finance introduced this into our normative documents. Later, first drafts and the first package of documents was developed, which were reflecting the IFRS 9 standards. And after that, the Bank of Russia was actively involved in discussion of various normative documents, and this was done together with lending organizations, with professional associations, and international auditing companies. In development of the concept and implementation of this IFRS 9 standards, so this led to the fact when the Bank of Russia had to align these requirements with our standards, and at the same time to preserve all regulatory requirements and prudential norms and rules that had been incorporated by colleagues in their normative documents. So, in development of such documents, we reached a certain compromise. We used the principle of correction approach, and this was done both for reserves and interest corrections in order to align our requirements in terms of using IFRS 9 standards with preservation of all the norms and principles which are now part of the prudential principles of the current national documents. After the state registration of the whole package of documents, I'd like to remind you that it consists of 15 documents. These are major documents and the major amendments. So there are 15 of them, and the majority of them stipulate that lending organizations could have about a year in order to incorporate IFRS 9 standards in their activities. Because of numerous requests from lending institutions, we were discussing it a lot, and in the middle of last year, some amendments were made, and the reporting requirements are now on a quarterly basis, not on a daily basis. And also there were some simplifications for non-banking lending organizations and some changes as well. So that was the very first experience of the regulator of the fully fledged implementation of international standards in the normative documents regulating the accounting reporting area. Whether it is good or bad, well, time will show. But the impact that we see now, the impact of implementation of these international standards. So right now, there are no significant changes in the work of banks. Now I'd like to give the floor to Maria Sergeyevna. Could you please comment on the specifics and consequences of introduction of these international standards into accounting reporting schemes? Thank you. I'm happy to welcome you all here. If we speak about the specifics of introduction of the IFRS 9 in the Russian Federation, we can say that this implementation itself is a specific thing, because IFRS, so they regulate not the reporting scheme, but the numbers that will be included into financial reports. And what we did, we were introducing various normative acts, and we were making sure that certain requirements become part of compulsory norms, and also there is explanation how this can be used and implemented in the Russian Federation. The second thing, the big four companies know about this. We develop legislation of the Russian Federation, and we usually have certain discrepancies with the international financial reporting standards, and so because there are certain differences, we may speak about such specifics. The first thing was mentioned already. It is banking regulation and the system of double reserves. So now we have reserves under this IFRS system and the regulatory reserves as well. And the second thing is linked to implementation of this IFRS 9 standards, and we, being the regulator, we decided to explain to the banks how this can be used. For example, the overdue debt registration. Yeah, so okay, there's overdue repayment of debt, and we now view them as part of the same pool. And the specific, another specific feature is bank warranties registration. So in our law, we have only these bank bonds or bank warranties. So we treat them all together. And one more thing, it is the corrective measures for non-market values. And this is related to loans. And we, as a regulator, we believe that this non-market correction shouldn't be used here. And the second thing, it is the escrow accounts, very important topic. And we, regulator, again, we explain that we don't believe that there should be some non-market correction here. Then certain provisional requirements. So the IFRS 9 became effective in 2018, but there was a delay. So this transitional period was 1 year, and we were very flexible about it. So the balance should be moved to a balance sheet January, but during the first quarter of 2019, all corrective measures can be taken. So again, we believe this gives a certain flexibility. And banks also could select how they can introduce this financial result of the transfer. So this could be done through current financial results or financial results for the previous periods. One more thing, banks having the basic license. There's a number of documents enabling such banks to simplify their accounting regulation. For example, there's an opportunity to use depreciated value only once a month, or only once a quarter. Others have to do it once per month. And then there's a very interesting discussion with such banks. They believe that the reserves under IFRS 9 have a very complicated model. And we explain that, no, we don't regulate the complexity of this. No, we just have a reference to IFRS 9, and we speak only about specific principles. So we do not require the complexity, and we don't regulate the level of this complexity. So the banks themselves, depending on their activities, they can form their own model. Also, within our discussions during this transitional period, as we heard already, we were dealing with major issues, and there were important things, and we managed to find solutions, and we'd like to thank all the banks for this fruitful discussion. As of the beginning of this year, yes, the potential losses and this fair value notion that was introduced. So banking regulation was amended, and part of the assets for which fair value is used, and now they're part of the reserves, and lots of banks want to have this on their accounting reports and balance sheets, and we enabled them to do it. One more thing. It is the criteria of significant transactions and so on, and also depreciation of interest values. So this can be done in line with the agreements. Yeah, so it's so-called linear depreciation. And one more very relevant aspect was changes of the period of calculation of reserves under IFRS 9, because originally it it was on a daily basis, then it was changed, and now it is once per quarter. There are certain outstanding aspects, and it is very important for us to get feedback and comments and proposals. So what we are discussing, the first very important thing, it is the so-called quarterly disputes. So this is what happens after the reporting date. So this is usually for the annual reporting date. And and it happens that it is not at the very end of the quarter, but much later, because calculations are prepared for the specific quarterly report date. We are still in the discussion, so for how long we can provide this additional timing after the end of the quarter. Then the next, it is the overdue debt that banks would like to write off their balance sheet. So not after a court decision, not when the decision is already available on termination of the agreement, but when the bank itself understands that it is impossible to get any payments of a specific loan agreement. So it is still under discussion, and we believe that there are possibilities that we will deal with that. And one more thing, this is linked to the very first slide. It is the debt that cannot be returned, repaid, and there's no hope that it might be paid. The difference is quite insignificant. So a number of banks they ask us to make it very close to the IFRS principles. You touched upon changes in the normative acts of the Bank of Russia for the banks with this basic license. Yeah, in terms of the depreciated cost, yeah, so you had it in your presentation. What can you say? Certain easement for such banks, which are reflected now in the normative acts. Do you think that they might influence the comparability of data, so among these banks and other lending organizations? I doubt that there will be any difference, because the only difference is the quarterly corrections. Yeah? So the accounting reports are prepared every quarter. Some banks, some organizations may choose to do it during the quarter. So here we need to use the criterion of significance, yeah, and I believe that it won't cause any differences. And we support the idea of providing this principle to the banks with basic license. Yeah. So, okay, as I said previously, the Bank of Russia, when we were taking a decision to implement the IFRS 9 standards within our normative documents, so our task was twofold. So firstly, the idea was to implement these accounting reporting principles, and on the other hand, we wanted to preserve the existing requirements in terms of the prudential regulation norms. And I have a question to Alexey Anatolievich. In your opinion, what specifics can we mention in this prudential principles if we speak about this transition to IFRS 9 standards? Because for you, I doubt that it was totally painless, and I'm sure that you had to take certain decisions how this accounting reporting might use all these new standards.
Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. Thank you for your question. As in the culinary art, we add some acid to the salt in order to find carbonatic gas to put the dough up. So we neutralized also the impact of IFRS 9. Could be surprising, but you need to know some background to understand that it was not weird at all. I would like to reiterate the idea of Madam Voloshyna and Mr. Kruzhalov. We have two reserves. So one reserve is used in the accounting to define financial resonance and financial reporting, and the second reserve that is used by regulating authorities to calculate necessary indicator to assess bank financial stability. Why these two reserves are separated? Beforehand, we discussed deeply this question, and I see my colleagues from the Bank of Russia and from the industry who took active part in the discussion. And as a conclusion, we defined, and it was rather a sad conclusion, we need to create regulating for all purposes based on one reserve is not possible. By doing so, we should have sacrificed something, either the respect of IFRS with all consequences due, or the absence of the possibility from surveillance body to impact the policy in value assessment and reserve placement, which means that we will abandon the most powerful lever on the financial situation of bank. If the regular authority find some over-evaluation or fraudulent risk assessment, because now we can use the reserve sometimes to officially solve this issue. And between these two extremities, the decision was made to keep two reserves. One that is conventional for all banks, prudential reserve, calculated according to method of controlling body. Another reality that is open due to the transfer to IFRS 9. Understanding that this transfer could result in financial situation volatility of a bank that is explained not by the poor quality of its balance, but due to one-time changes of the coordinate system. We had a lot of internal discussions to understand whether we need to connect our regulation directly to IFRS 9 or to postpone it until later when we will have enough data to see whether the banks are fine with new IFRS 9, whether the points the assessments are more or less the same according to IFRS 9 and according to our internal methods. So via regulations and our documents, we created two reserves. First, it was all related to documents, capitals, and prudential elements because of the transfer to IFRS 9. What has been done else except for keeping two reserves? And I would like to highlight that the second reserve is used for tax purposes. But to my mind, would be more logical to calculate tax bases using the same elements that are used for reporting purposes. The banks keep unveiling the information about the reserves. This is important for us for internal analytics, for our action planning, and for us to be able to ask the banks to explain tremendous difference for some assets. Value corrections are not accepted in the bank evaluation because it is in the IFRS 9 The reason is simple. We need to see the new reality in bank reporting. And this is why we have new quarterly reporting. The first data has been received not long ago. It is only 1 point, 1 dot in the curve. We don't know where it is leading to. So no consequences, no conclusions should be made yet, because banks have been reporting according to IFRS for a long time. IFRS 9 is a new reality as compared to previous standards. First and foremost, as far as risk assessment is concerned, this approach is ambiguous. I will not comment upon the fact that we assess losses until the end of life of the loan at the moment of the credit being granted. So it's just the reality. These are the methods that we used to modify our 7 documents related to prudential indicators. And the transfer to IFRS 9 for us as a bank regulator came unspotted. I would like also to announce that in the nearest future we will publish our clarification as for how you should take into account your reserves and the re-evaluation on IFRS if the currency position is opened. The text is ready, so it will be published in the nearest future. Thank you very much for your elaborated answer. In your speech, you mentioned certain quantitative indicators. What is the difference between IFRS 9 and prudential indicators in figures? I hope that the figures are seen by people close to the screens. This is based on the very first reporting as for April 1 this year for systemically important banks and for all other credit institutions. The columns are easy to read. In the banks of systematic importance, reserves on IFRS 9 are lower, but we are talking about average numbers because peaks can be considerable, both sides. So but the average temperature in the hospital is presented on the screen. They are less than the prudential reserves. If we were to accept the possibility for the banks to use the figures while doing prudential reserves, the bank will have a positive balance. You can see that the difference is around, I would say, 10%. Not a big difference, by the way, but not a little gain. It would have an important impact on their financial health without any changes actually in the financial health. This is because we are changing the rules of the game. You can see in the bottom. I would be very careful in evaluating the accuracy of this assessment, because in bank reporting, without their will, we have some discrepancies, since they are not very experienced in assessing their assets according to the new rules. So the average capital decrease in the banking industry because of the game rules changes is around 2 to 3%. Not a huge amount, I repeat, but it's a go-down trend. From two colors, green one and red one, you can see the reason why we decided to neutralize, for now, the impact of the transfer to IFRS 9. I would like to say that within the Bank of Russia, we had different viewpoints. There were people who advocated for the same transfer with accounting reports. But the evaluations show that more careful position was the right one. If the red were more present on the screen, we would be able just to modify our threshold indicators to mitigate it. But since the impact is in both ways, we could say that some banks would be in a better position and others in the worst position. Is it a good thing? Is it a reasonable thing? This difference, the question stands open. We need to accumulate much longer reporting, much more than 1Q, much longer than 1 year, in order for us to start really giving a deep thought to the idea of the possibility of doing asset evaluation and obligations based on IFRS 9. This is our forecast for time being. We are expecting more information. It would be interesting to see the result of 2Q, whether they will correlate between the first quarter and the second quarter of 2019. We'll see. Time will show. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Lobanov. Very interesting analysis of the impact. We see the impact going in both directions, specifically in terms of systematic banks with systematic importance. I would like to highlight that IFRS 9 started to become partially active starting from January 1, but all big banks, not only them, but also group of companies and corporations, brief those that present reports according to IFRS, they started using the rules much earlier in 2017 and in 2018. So for them, they had this preparation period in order to establish their models. And I think that they learned some lessons and they implemented it while working with vendors, offering software solutions to synchronize the requirements of IFRS 9 and the Russian-specific accounting regulation. In this context, I'm very keen to hear from big systematic companies to know what did they do to solve the issue, what shortcuts did they take, what difficulties did they encounter while reading our legal documents, because our local Russian legal documents, they are not contradictory to IFRS. I'm not saying they copy it, no, far from that, but at least there's no conflict between them. However, we have some Russian-specific terms in the documents, and I would like to ask the question to Mikhail Ratinsky. You are the chief accountant of one of the biggest banks in Russia, the Bank of Systematic Importance. What were the challenges you faced while transferring your accounting reporting towards IFRS 9? Thank you very much, Mr. Kruzhalov. I tell you the truth, it was not the easiest transfer because we had to change the basis of the accounting and the automation of the accounting. We haven't seen the shift of this importance for the last 10 years. Talking about the challenges that we faced while transferring us to IFRS, I would like to specify 4 different dimensions. The first 3 are bank-specific, and the 4th one is more related to the top 100 bank. The first challenge is the methodological one. Accounting rules were dramatically changed. If in 2018 the understanding about IFRS 9 was reserved to specific colleagues, but starting from January 1, all accounting departments of all banks have to understand what IFRS are all about. So we developed not only the methodology, but we also gained in capacities of our accounting experts. It is an important impact to highlight. And against the backdrop of the methodology, I would like to express my gratitude to the central bank because it followed us up during every stage of the implementation. And I heard the same feedback from different chief accountants of different banks. We felt your support. Another important methodology aspect is related to the fact that the algorithms that are used became much more complicated and complex. They are based now on economy-specific principles, like, for instance, efficient interest rate or gross balance sheet value. So we took the methodology and used it for technical purposes, setting goals for IT services, for instance. And I'm starting to talk about the second challenge. And the second challenge is technological. All credit institutions were forced to adjust all their IT systems, not only accounting systems and softwares, but data management systems on the front office, and the treatment of information and input of information required in order to become more efficient in terms of model calculation of fair value and outstanding reserves, to bring necessary information for product reporting, not accountant reporting, but product reporting, that should be incorporated in software instruments used for accounting. Since the quality requirements for data are much higher, the third challenge was operational. We were forced to create new operational processes that we haven't seen before, and one of which is presented on the screen. We implemented the module of SPPI testing for business and for accounting services. It marked the appearance of a completely new element that has to be inserted, not in a just simple process like we do quarterly IFRS reporting. We embedded it in a routine reporting process for us not to have a panic classification at the moment when we close Russian reporting. In order to respect the quality and the timeline of Russian reporting, we had introduced it beforehand.
Yeah, and that was classification of instruments, and it is like a collection of checkboxes, and it is for people who deal with loans and for individuals, and there are certain requirements, some covenant packages and individual requirements in the security documentation. So, and there was a very user-friendly format, and so they were ticking the boxes, and then the system gives a device, so whether we need to use the fair value or something else. So this is very important for the routine daily operation. The second part of this challenge is the an increase on the quality of data. So for a number of types of data, so that was not so necessary previously. For example, future payments under loan transactions. So if previously this operational mistake was not relevant, and it was possible to revise it at the time when the payment is made. Now we see that the effective interest rate might change because of this, and primary accounting should be adapted as well. So this is the second part of this challenge. And one more challenge, number 4, and for us it was very specific because we are a big bank, and this is the volume factor. Because even just a simple transfer of the balance on your accounts, and if you have more than 150 million accounts, this is quite complicated. In addition to this, introduction of algorithms in many different systems, and I can say that we do reporting on products, and this is linked to accounting reporting systems. So we have a lot of systems, and that was a challenge for us. So I prepared a number of illustrations. Over 40 processes had to be streamlined in order to transfer to this IFRS system. Also, we developed over 500 control tools for monitoring the whole environment. Then there was over 11,000 loan agreements. So they were analyzed for correction of classification under IFRS. Why 11,000? We have many more, but there are standard type products, but there are also transactions for very big corporations where every deal has specific requirements, and that is why we had to analyze them individually. In terms of the task force number of people, over 1,000 people were ensuring this transfer, and they were working during the Christmas holiday of 2019, because 47 reporting systems had to be transferred to these new principles. Fortunately, it is not that many, so we managed to do that, and we succeeded. So this is what I can say about major challenges we faced in view of this transfer to the new requirements. Thank you very much. Mikhail Sergeyevich, I would like to ask you one more question. Judging by this information on the screen, this work was enormous or quite big, and definitely the share of Sberbank in the whole banking system is quite great, and definitely the transparency and increase of transparency of financial reporting of Sberbank of Russia is definitely something that contributes to transparency of the whole banking sector. I would like to find out your opinion in terms of the additional costs that banks incurred for implementation of this IFRS 9 standards, and all these changes in the business model and streamlining of the processes. So all these difficulties, did they influence did they contribute to increasing of transparency of this banking of the whole banking sector, or maybe these costs were too high for such an impact? Well, here I would like to stand in shoes of financial analyst and not an accountant. In my opinion, in reporting, we have now two very important things. Firstly, it is that now financial organizations reports demonstrate the basic models of their work with customers. Yeah, so this classification, yeah, so those vanilla type loans and their fair value is used. So now it is obvious. So just looking at the reports, you can immediately see it. So whether, for example, a project financing model is used or something else, and it is just classical, credits that they deal with. Yeah. And in addition to that, and in my opinion, I believe it is extremely important, there's a significant improvement of the timely information on banks' activities, yeah, because the assessment of reserves, yeah, this is important, yeah, because there we can see how this will be shown in the IFRS. So because previously all these corrective measures, okay, they could be seen, but now we have covered this gray area, and banking groups, for banking groups now we have a very good proxy tool, and on a daily basis we can see how their activities will be reflected in IFRS reports. So definitely this is a big step forward. It improved transparency, and it improved how quickly we can see all this information. And now we can see more business-related information from those, dry figures. Thank you. I cannot but ask one more question. So when you were telling us about the previous period, then when IFRS was used only by very few organizations, but as of January of this year, this is something all accountants in all organizations should do. And I was monitoring this process of introduction of these principles very carefully, and this includes Sberbank. And I can say that this IFRS standards, it's not something that only accountants are responsible for. As if I'm not mistaken, lots of business processes were revised as well, and other departments and divisions were actively involved in that. Am I right? Yes, you're absolutely right. Firstly, this classification of financial instruments, yes, it required inclusion of specialists from the corporate frontline, and also specialists who work in our products department. And also, our legal specialists were part of that, and our operational units as well. If we speak about the number of people who are currently involved in these processes and who are doing it on a daily basis, probably about 50,000 people, all in all, for the whole Sberbank. So actually, so practically all our corporate and investment blocks and legal department, all of them. So this, of course, broadened the horizon of everyone who takes part in implementation of those processes. Thank you very much. Right, we live not in an isolated world, and we haven't been pioneers who have been introducing these new principles. Sergei Anatolyevich was telling us about the decisions taken from the point of view of the banking sphere, regulation in the Russian Federation, and using of IFRS 9 principles in accounting reporting. But it would be great to take a look at the European level, because the European Central Bank began dealing with this issue long before the Central Bank of Russia. Right. And what about the impact on banking regulation in European states, and what issues the regulator deals with right now and during the transition period? And I would like Kruzhalov to tell us about it. Yes. This is very interesting to take a look at the international experience, and I would like to look at European states, and maybe we can draw an analogy. You know, we don't want to repeat our own mistakes. We want to learn from what our colleagues were doing. Before we speak about this, I would like to emphasize three conceptually important points that impact on this process. So this is a summary of what actually the previous speakers were talking about. Firstly, the level of reporting and accounting. You know, these are two different things. Okay, the regularity and the granularity. Yeah, but we have different purposes. And in Europe, they were doing it within the reporting structure. In Europe, the new principles of IFRS 9, they influenced their position. So, and the regulator was scrutinizing all potential changes, and they gave options to banks, so within 5 years, to recognize effects. So it was not a one-time effect recognition. And thirdly, let's have a look. If we speak about the Russian accounting, and if in Europe, okay, they were transitioning from IFRS 39 to IFRS 9, but for us this distance was bigger and more complicated. In Europe, they did some quantitative analysis of effect. It was a report was published in autumn of 2016 and summer 2017, and then a first report, comprehensive report of European Central Bank was published, and it describes the effects of this transition. The assessment of 2017, it was confirmed in terms of the growth of reserves and the influence on capital. So all that was confirmed, so there was no shock. So here you can see some statistics, but these are just initial numbers, and I wouldn't say that they are not reliable, but their quality will be improved after some time. This is just an illustration. Don't view it as something, final. So the European Central Bank hasn't published any official final results. If we look at CET Tier 1 level, so less than 60% of the banks became part of this analysis. Their capital, their equity reduced among 20% of the banks. And the scale of this correction was just about 20 basic points. So the range was from 100 to 110 basic points. So the impact on capital adequacy, it was manageable and it was expected. And banks may choose the time for a recognition of this effect during a 5-year period. In terms of the classification of assets, a lot within this IFRS 9 is devoted to that. The structure of a balance wasn't greatly affected after the introduction of these standards. I would like to draw an analogy. Now, I don't want to sound provocative, but largely, for a number of years, we used so many different systems of reporting and, some management reporting. It was like a hybrid. And some companies used IFRS, and then there was tax reporting. And now there's opportunity to align all this. And now, really, it is all very close. The regulator is not ready yet to use it for prudential purposes. There is a paradox. If I stand in the shoes of investor, then I can say, okay, there's this official reporting of banks, and it is IFRS based. Okay, there's consolidated reporting, there's specific areas reporting, and I know that the bank manages all the activities using this reporting. At the same time, I understand that the regulator looks at this and takes prudential decisions on the basis of some other reporting here. There's a paradox. Let's have a look at the numbers. Let's have a look at the analysis that was done a long time ago. This was based on the assessment. And so this was done for information purposes by banks. And now it is all different. Different banks do it differently. About 50% out of those 10 banks, this normative requirement grew, and the effect among the majority of banks was over 20 basic points. And you see the range, you can see it at the bottom. It is quite big. What does it tell us about? This is the very first point of assessment of this effect, and time is needed in order to understand how we can move forward. Definitely, if these normative requirements grew up, then the potential of the market grows, and we can say that this is a positive effect. But it is a fair comment to say that if we admit that all banks can rely on these models, and this is already well tested. I cannot agree or disagree, but it's my personal opinion. In order to move all these standards together, we, of course, ideally would like to put financial and accounting reporting together, but time is needed for that. And the European Central Bank, so they do the same in 2019. They are doing a deep quantitative analysis of this effect. And what is the focus? The focus on definition of default and basic notions. So the notion of default is important because it might take us different solutions. Then the second and third stage or types of loans, this is important. Then the standardized approach for lending provision. Okay, so this is the concept of this forward-looking losses. It is important, and also the disclosure, this thing. So, okay, disclosures, a lot is done, but there are certain discrepancies. So the major efforts of the regulator in 2019 will be aiming at elimination of such discrepancies, and I'm sure that at the end of the year we will see the results of this analysis. One more thing, a very important topic in Europe, it is NPL, non-performing loans. Well, this is parallel to introduction of IFRS 9, when the new chair of the oversight board council of the European Central Bank. So this topic was one of the most important ones. Within the previous 5 years, the share of this non-performing loans, so it increased from 1 trillion euros. Actually, it reduced to less than 600 billion euros in an absolute amount. How did they reach it? The regulator, the European Central Bank, they developed recommendations. So they are compulsory or advisory. So a lot of work was done. So the European Central Bank worked a lot with different banks in order to decrease the share of such loans. And so they are written off in a timely fashion. So, and they call it a legacy risk. So these are problems accumulated within the previous periods, and the regulator fights for eliminating or reducing them. So their concern now is that a new generation of non-performing loans is growing. So they see that there are new non-performing loans, and this may sound strange, but they see that these risks are concentrated in the real estate, commercial, and housing. And this will be demonstrated in all the audits of 2019. Yeah, so this is the overall picture. The overall picture in the European landscape. And in terms of non-performing loans, this is a question whether we are ready to such strict measures. I believe not yet. But if we follow all these international trends, then probably we'll be following it.
Thank you very much. Madam Nekrasova, very interesting. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on my question? After IFRS 9 principles implementation in accounting or auditing organization gain in their roles. As for the verification of different models, the accuracy of different models, you need to assess them to understand their trustworthiness. Does the auditor see his or her role increasing in order to improve the confidence towards the banking system in general? Yes, I represent first and foremost auditing company, but I did a lot of consulting as for the transfer of to IFRS. Auditing as a profession is changing and will be changing. As mentioned by my colleagues, processes have changed. Not always controlling area on which we rely on was following the above-mentioned changes. Many efforts should be applied. Whether the new data generated by new systems and methods are trustworthy. The central bank doesn't regulate the way we evaluate reserves. There is a direct reference to the original IFRS. But often we hear from the central bank and from our clients, if you have questions how to transfer yourself to IFRS, you'd better ask your auditor. We are glad when such requirements come. But it's a good tradition to consult. Don't leave it until December, January, or February if you have some complicated questions related to non-standard transactions or big transaction. The culture of audit consulting will prevail, to my mind. We need to discuss in advance some important issues that may have an impact on the reporting. This is the role of the audit or the auditor or consultant. We don't have industry practice. We don't have recommendations from the central bank. Yes, we use the models, but what kind of models? What kind of parameters? The role or the responsibility of the auditor is getting more important and the link between bank and auditor. We will be the first to see the data and we'll be the first to treat them. We have different clients using different approaches, and our role, as pronounced by the European auditors, Basel Committee have the subgroup on audit, and they discuss a lot the issue related to audit under IFRS 9. We will strive and we will contribute to create the common approach. Otherwise, we will have to change our hat every time we do an audit reporting. We will still control the comprehensive respect of IFRS to gain in comparability of reports. This is how I see the role and the objective on an audit for the short-term perspective. I would like to add one thing. You had a very good idea that the link between the bank regulator and the auditor is important. We completely share your approach towards problem solving of IFRS 9 implementation. When we need to analyze difficult and complex moments, when we use IFRS 9 standards to assess active monetary instruments. This morning during the plenary, we heard that self-regulating organizations' role is becoming more important. You shall not forget about professional associations of the banking community. I consider that when we need to solve complicated professional issues, we need to bring on board professional community. The role of self-regulating organizations should be increased, since the Bank of Russia has a lot of plans as for the implementation of fully fledged implementation of IFRS principles in the accounting regulation. We always do a remark that we will implement IFRS not word by word, but our legal framework will be based on IFRS principles. Certain dimensions will be adapted in order to respect our Russian-specific legislation. We cannot avoid it. We need to take into consideration the specific features of the Russian legislation, because we have some regulatory requirements to be respected. This is what we do. And to give you an example, today we mentioned the principle of corrective accounts. We will be moving forward towards IFRS. We will do it smartly, carefully. And I would like to wish us all the success. And I would like to express my gratitude to all panelists who took part in our panel. We have two questions. Do we have 2 minutes? Do we have questions in the audience? Please, the mic is open. First, thank you very much to all colleagues. I represent Bank Central Invest. We started working in 1996, working with IFRS in 2018. We started using international standards. We consulted with PwC. We had some problems with international standards, but when we started implementing IFRS according to the Russian standards, we show some profit and we received, but we were not able to reflect 2 billion of capital in regulatory reports. With a capital of 12 billions, it's an important discrepancy. I will not throw my emotions on you. I will not share our experience in IFRS implementation in the central bank. I have only one demand. We wrote you the first letter to the central bank management. Thank you very much for being very sincere about the principles. When you try to respect the interests of the systematically important banks, and you lose the capital of several regional banks, not all of them. I have only one demand. We are ready for the conversation. We will bring the auditor on board. We have shareholders, DIG, European Bank. We have shareholders related to investment funds. We are ready to discuss the issue because the result, as for now, is as follows. Our shareholders invest in us according to IFRS. And they say you have more than enough capital, but we we show the reporting according to Russian accounting standards that we are lacking in capital, actually. And it's very difficult for me to explain to our international shareholders in the current situation. Every international shareholder is like a golden coin for us. So please bring professional community on board. Half of the banks, Russian banks, are normal. Don't forget, don't try to kill us. Let's solve our issues together. Yes, of course, we will engage in conversation with you. And Mr. Lobanov, in his presentation, mentioned that it's too early to draw any conclusions. We should wait and see, because data available covers only a short period of time. We will discuss the questions with you and with professional community and with shareholders, by the way, too. Now, it's not timely to take opposite decisions. You are in one situation, others are in another situation. So let's wait, but we will engage you in the dialogue with you. We will find the right middle. We have no time left, but for one question. Seeing none, thank you very much for your participation. Good day.